Welcome to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds, featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I am your host, Larissa Napolitan, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team, here to lead conversations and to shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. I am thrilled to announce our 2025 Virtual MTSS Summit happening this December. This two-day event is all about MTSS innovation with intention, where we will dive into bold ideas and practical strategies to ensure every student is supported and every educator is equipped to succeed. Join an international community of educators and leaders to explore how intentionality and innovation can drive meaningful change in MTSS implementation. You won't want to miss this incredible opportunity to connect and grow. Education technology often feels like a double-edged sword, full of promise, but also fraught with challenges. For many educators, navigating the rapid rise of AI tools can feel overwhelming, raising questions about equity, ethics, and effectiveness. But what if we can move beyond the buzzwords and focus on promising practices that truly enhance teaching and learning? So today we are diving into some of the cutting-edge research and real-world application of AI in education with Chris Agnew, Director of Generative AI for Education Hub at Stanford. And together we're going to explore how AI can empower educators, support students, and reimagine what's possible in our schools. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Larissa. So nice to be here.
Well, first of all, you kind of have a very interesting job title and very interesting work. And so I'd love for you to share a little bit with our audience about how you came about being the director of generative AI for education.
Yeah, I would say I have a non-traditional way of getting to this world of AI. I am the non-techie person thinking about AI in education. My whole career has been as an educator for 25 years. I spent much of the first half to two-thirds of my career working and teaching in non-traditional learning environments and really swinging between kind of informal learning settings and formal learning settings. So by informal learning settings, it was with both secondary age and post-secondary age learners learning durable skills, things like communication, leadership, critical thinking in settings like apprenticeships, wilderness, and classroom as a community. And I'd spend part of my year doing that. And then I would also spend part of my year teaching in the classroom. And really my goal was trying to merge these two worlds of the more immersive hands-on learning environment that could provide real feedback, create relevancy, and build many of these 21st century skills or the 6 C's that people talk about today. But then also marry that with quote unquote the rigor and the academics that historically comes through a classroom setting. In 2015, I started leading an organization called the Teton Science Schools that had a lab school, hosted school groups from around the country to learn next generation science standards in the national parks. And we had a GSE in partnership with several universities. In many ways, felt like this is where it could all come together. These hands-on experiential learning settings married with K-12, more traditional classroom-based setting. And I did that role for 6 years. And I left in early 2021 for a couple different reasons. A big one being Teton Science Schools was based in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, one of the wealthiest zip codes in the country with very generous philanthropy. And I learned that even with massive philanthropy, there was not a clear path to access and scale for all kids for this type of learning that we knew really was impactful and mattered, where kids could do experiments in the national parks, outdoors, hands-on. And I recognized if the business model through that was not possible in the wealthiest zip code in the country, there has to be some different path to this. And I recognized technology had to play some role. So I spent a couple of years working for some venture-backed ed tech companies. And through that, during that time, ChatGPT came out and we started building some education products, specifically in the assessment realm. And I had a real unlock at that stage of potentially generative AI shows promise for enabling some of the most timeless ways for learning through experience, learning through collaboration, learning through real life. And I started talking to Stanford about in early 2024 when they were starting to spin up the Generative AI for Education Hub, and I began summer 2024.
That's awesome. I love that you shared some of your background experience, because I think that plays a lot into how you view technology, right? Often, if you see the potential of those hands-on learning experiences and how just a different way of learning rather than traditional classroom setting, like I think that it spins your perspective, I think, on what technology can do for us. So, we know that AI is reshaping a lot of industries, and education is no exception. So to start, maybe can you share a little bit about how you believe that AI is transforming the way that we think about teaching and learning, and maybe what excites you the most about that potential?
Yes, and I'm glad you ended with the word potential, because I think right now we're at a stage of shows potential to transform, but we're not to a point of has transformed or will transform, and the research is still early. What we're seeing and the way we think about AI's potential within education falls within three categories. Our core target audience is education system leaders. So superintendents, state K-12 leaders that are trying to make decisions for how they can leverage AI to benefit student schools and learning within their education system, a group of schools. And often an entryway to thinking about it being AI in their schools and their education system, is as an efficiency play. Can we use this to save teachers time? Can we use AI to optimize this process? It's also what the business world is seeing as kind of a first use case as well. And so that's first category. Second category is as a means to improve student outcomes. Really the reason we're all here in education, right? Of like, can we move the needle on early literacy through AI tools? Can we improve math student outcomes in these ways? So it's about efficacy, it's about impact. That's the second category. The third category is about how AI could help us and enable learning to be reimagined, like what school actually looks like, what the day looks like, how learners engage with each other and the world. And I would say right now, I would put the ways people are using it ranked in that order. Most often we're seeing it as an efficiency play, next to work to improve student outcomes, and least common, which I think is a missed opportunity, is to reimagine what learning looks like.
Well, there's a lot in there that I want to comment on, but first of all, I think the reimagining, because I remember this as an educator in the early 2010s, and more technology was coming out, right? And I worked with educators who had been doing this a long time, and they're slow to adopt the smart board and using things just as a replacement for the projector or whatever, and not really tapping into that, the reimagining of how you go about learning. And I think that there's always sort of that barrier to reimagining, because it seems, because there's potential there, but you don't, it's the unknown, right? And I think a lot of times with technology, any fear that educators have around that is that we don't actually know what that looks like. We know it has potential, but we don't know what it's there. And so often we then tend to go to the safe route. So I can see why that's the least amount that we're seeing AI for, because it really does take those really brave educators to say, yes, let's see what this can do. Having that experimental mindset, to go into the classroom and say, let's reimagine what this looks like. Because, they answer to board members and they answer to parents and community. And it's a lot harder to go to lean into that. So I love that. I love that idea of how can we see that reimagining. And I was one of those educators where I was like, let's see what it can do. And, just kind of like navigating the chaos that happened in a middle school classroom when you see what it can do. But I think that there's lots of potential with the AI. I think there is something to say about the efficiency work, the work of educators, and how consuming that is. And there's so much of what we do here at Branching Minds to really think about the role of the teacher, the role of the educator. How do we make that easier for them? The administrative part of it. How do we bring all that data together so they can see it, right? Because we know that work, if it's too cumbersome, is a hindrance to actually influencing, supporting students. So I think there's a lot in there. I love that you just kind of leaned into, what is the potential that we see, because there isn't, like, you're right. There's so much of it that's new. We don't know, research is just coming out. You're like, we don't know. There's no guarantee. I wanted to say too, is that in education, we want the silver bullet. We want the fix, right? What's going to make this better? And many times they want a guarantee. And if something's not a guarantee, they just like dismiss it. So right. I think there's a lot there for AI.
Well, and I think you were talking about it's hard to make change, or what I heard you say is it's hard to make change towards a like reimagined future if you can't see it or you haven't seen it. And I think to build on that, the real challenge in our large K-12 systems is might be pockets of innovation or pockets of reimagining, but scaling that to a system-wide level, that's really where the challenge is. Because like, let's be honest that our bold challenge within public education is a very large, very diverse democracy in trying to support all kids across this massive country to create opportunity for all of them is a big task. And so a core part of that on educating for a democracy, living our values and creating opportunity for all kids that they deserve is not only about pockets of excellence, but making sure that this shining star of a school and their practices can be scaled to more kids and more schools, or this public charter network that has demonstrated great practices, expanding that to have influence statewide, say.
Oh yeah. I mean, I remember, visiting other schools and I'm like, that's really great for them, but I don't know if that could happen. We can see those pockets, but you're right. It's like, how do we make that scalable? How do we put that into other contexts versus just that one school? Along with that, to go back to the AI, there's that concept of AI literacy, it's gaining a lot of traction. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about what does it mean for students and teachers to be AI literate? And why do you think that's a critical foundation for schools to build, especially sort of as what we're talking about for scalability?
Well, first, I'll shout out some great resources out there because there are some organizations and some thinkers that are doing really good work in the AI literacy realm specifically. AI EDU talks about AI readiness and system readiness. And so this is almost a envisioning of AI literacy for all within a system, from the education leaders to teachers to students to families and parents to the community. Teach AI with OECD released an AI literacy framework this spring that is a great resource. And then a colleague of mine, Victor Lee at the Stanford Accelerator for Learning and Stanford Graduate School for Education, has done really great work both researching AI literacy and then providing resources to teachers through what he calls craft resources. We can link to that in notes. But big picture, let's rewind a little bit to maybe 25 years ago, earlier days of the internet, and there was a recognition of greater digital literacy for students. So in many ways, we can think of this as like an outgrowth or a more wide-ranging encapsulation of that. So it's about let's focus on students first, helping students understand both how AI works and about AI and then appropriate uses of AI. So a lot of things come into play here as far as preparing them to be like critically literate, participatory citizens. And I think a real leap forward with the OECD framework that Teach AI released in the spring was not thinking about AI literacy as a single class that students take in high school to quote unquote check the box, much like I took keyboarding in high school as like my computer class, but instead thinking about AI as being discipline specific, and AI literacy is discipline specific. So learning about AI in a computer science context looks very different than learning about AI from a humanities context. And so that's certainly true from a student perspective, but also true when we're thinking about building AI literacy and AI readiness for teachers as well.
Yeah, I was going to comment because so many of our listeners are, building or district leaders, and thinking through AI literacy isn't just about the students, but it is about teachers and how do you use this tool? How do you ingrain it in the work you do? I think having not only AI policies around how students use it, but how educators use it as well, and having those discussions amongst your staff is really important, because a lot of times people don't necessarily know how to think. Like in my work, we spend a lot of time talking about how are we using AI? How do we make helps our work, and how does it hinder? And so in the same way, I think that there's a need for having that for educators as well, because how you utilize it with students and with your own work is greatly influences each. So
I'd love to drill down on that point a little more, because I think there's nuance here that's important for both education system leaders and product builders to be thinking about. When we think about AI in education, first off, people might run to the place of, oh, that is kids engaging with AI, sitting in front of a computer with a chatbot. Like that's the image that comes to mind, right? And that could be true. And there are so many different ways that AI fits within a system. And I'll make this specific in two ways. So I do have regular conversations with technology providers, education systems, be they LEAs or SEAs. And so often they're building around that quote unquote AI engagement or delivery to students and skipping over the teacher level in a bunch of different ways, missing the opportunity to build dashboarding for teachers to have greater understanding of how their students are engaging with these AI tools, skipping over the scaffoldings and support that is essential for them to be able to use these tools effectively, just skipping over that teacher level, which I think is a real missed opportunity. And second way to make this tangible is at the beginning of August, we released some research that we'd done on 9,000 teachers that used the School AI platform. They adopted the School AI platform at the beginning of the 2024 school year. And so we tracked their use of that tool for the first 3 months of the school year. They hadn't used this tool before. And we saw just over 40% became regular or power users. But what was particularly interesting, I found, was for regular users, early on, they spent a bunch of their time building AI tools for their students. As they started using the tool more, almost one-to-one, they traded what they were previously spending time building AI tools that were student-facing. They traded that time for actually using AI to support their own practice as a teacher. And so by the end of that 3 months, the vast majority of their time was using the platform, and the tool was helping them plan their day, build a lesson plan, research a topic, even assess student work. And it wasn't even building AI tools to face students. So the headline here is the teacher level is essential.
That's so interesting to me, because I think for me as a teacher, I imagine, I think about this all the time. As a teacher, I would have loved to have a chatbot to go, hey, translate this for my student that's, new to the US and doesn't speak English, or differentiate this lesson for 3 different levels. right? Any kind of differentiation that we could do with for students would be phenomenal. And so I think through these just the ways of making the time consuming parts of my day easier, and it's like having a teacher assistant. I would think that, and I did this with other technology. There was a while that's like, oh, it's great to have this tool that I can have my students on, right? Or this technology. But sometimes that would be more cumbersome and it wouldn't actually get the result that I would want. I want the students to actually have a different experience than the technology provided. And so it's so interesting to think about how teachers adopting into going, oh, this isn't just about students, but it's also about how I can make my work not just easier, but more using my time for the most benefit for students. Because in the long run, like AI can't replace that teacher. They still are doing the critical work of they know the students in their classroom. They know what they need. So I love that's very, very interesting research and has large implications for how leaders can approach the work of using AI with their teachers and promoting it and encouraging them, right? Learning how to write the right kind of prompt in generative, AI is so important to kind of get the results that you want from it. So even learning that, I think there's many, like that was kind of a learning curve I think many of us encountered when we first had Chat GPT or whatever it was, like learning how to write the right prompt. So that's so interesting. I do want to ask a little bit about some, you're talking a little bit about your research. Are there other examples that you can, because one of the goals of AI in education is really to help close those achievement gaps and promote the use of AI for all, like we talk about educating all students. Do you have any examples of how AI can be used to support those underserved communities and students?
Yes, I will give you 3 quick examples and we can drill down into any of these if you want to go for more detail. So the Generative AI for Education Hub is part of the broader SCALE initiative. A partner lab of ours is the National Student Support Accelerator, which does research around high impact tutoring. And high impact tutoring, based on NSSA's research and lots of programs, many that were spun up during COVID to mitigate and close learning loss and learning gaps during the pandemic, have identified high impact tutoring as an essential part built into the school day of closing the achievement gap and creating additional learning opportunities for the kids that need it most. So NSSA released in the fall last year some research called Tutor Copilot. And this research looked at digital tutoring with 4th grade students and real human tutors, but through a digital interface. And instead of the AI engaging directly with the student, the AI supported the tutor. So after each student response, the AI would suggest 3 different responses for the tutor. The tutor could choose to ignore those, do their own thing, or they could choose to respond with one of those pedagogically grounded responses that the AI provided. Really interesting findings there. Math scores, this was math tutoring for 4th graders. These math scores did go up in the short term. I think what was most interesting was previously these human tutors had been benchmarked. High performers meeting expectations, low performers. This tutor copilot tool brought all the low performing tutors up to meeting expectations. So historically, talent recruitment and retention within tutoring is a huge barrier to scaling that opportunity. And so that could be a real unlock for creating or onboarding more effective tutors more effectively and more quickly. So that's one area of research. Second one that I'll mention, in the fall, the Stanford Accelerator for Learning hosted a Learning Differences Hackathon. So it brought together entrepreneurs, educators, and current students for a couple days to think about how AI could support students with learning differences. We released a white paper on that. We can link to that in notes, but there are great ideas and potential for supporting individuals with learning differences, special ed students, etc. And then lastly, I'll shout out one Stanford student who founded a company last year called Journify, which is creating opportunities through AI to support teachers in building more effective IEPs, in short. And so these are three really tangible ways where I think AI could help support students that have additional learning needs, maybe miss things earlier in their education career and need support in catching up, and have shown promise in all.
Oh my gosh. I think I love that you're talking through like some of these just potential, like I would never think of just a program, how AI could help write a better IEP, like it just, I don't know. I'm blown away about just the implications of what you're talking about. Specifically, the tutoring is very interesting, like helping low performing tutors meet expectations through generating the AI response. Because I imagine though that also influences their become better at responding, because AI is basically coaching, almost like coaching them as they go and they become better. And I think that to me has large implications for the talent field in general. Like I think, how do we help train and onboard and help support employees? I think it's a very interesting concept. And it's something to think about too, I think, with, even district and building leaders. And I imagine educators thinking through, how do I help this teacher that is struggling in a classroom to know how to respond to student situations, right? Like using AI to help generate their response and coach them through different scenarios and things like that. I think that there's a lot of ideas there. This kind of reminds me of this quote that I found from you, actually. As I was sort of preparing for this episode, I read this article and you said that we don't want to just use this technology to optimize our current flawed system. If we do that, what a missed opportunity. We need to hold this more aspirational vision for how this technology can help us reimagine and rethink what learning can look like for our kids, for our students, and for our schools. I loved that quote because it kind of sums up what we have been talking about, just the idea of reimagining how we're thinking about education. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about how you think, just as you've encountered working with schools and reading the research, where do you think the barrier is for some of that aspirational vision for the technology?
That's the big question in reimagining K-12 education, right? That we've been grappling with for decades. So I don't claim to have the answer there. I will point out one challenge that I think is somewhat unique to ed tech in specific, in its aspiration, in it not always living and regularly not meeting its aspirational vision for the impact it could have. And even more specific than just ed tech broadly, AI specifically, is that virtually all AI products currently come from the private sector, which is pretty normal, and like that's the space where most innovation. Also, most of those private sector companies are venture backed. And what that means is they ultimately need to provide return to investors in X amount of runway. It is much more effective to sell into an existing market to solve the problems of now and today, rather than to create an entirely new market that doesn't exist yet, as in a new vision for what school looks like. You could be selling this amazing transformative learning platform and model, but if no schools have the ability to use that model, no matter how great your product is, you will have no market to sell into. Innovators have this challenge of, I need to sell into a market while also creating an innovative product. But it means that they're solving the problems of now, which can fall into the optimizing our current flawed system. Also, education system leaders are faced with this challenge, and I truly believe an intention and a goal of innovation, but within systems that have many competing stakeholders with different visions on what's needed for the future of learning. And both, we have to improve our NAEP scores, but we also have to build 21st century skills, and we have to meet all these goals. It's hard. So I think that challenge, or that current structure, can create more often than not a system where we're just optimizing our current.
Yeah. Well, and I would say too, I appreciate you sort of naming that what the education leaders are facing, and many of our listeners probably can relate to this. Of you're doing the best you can with what you have, right? You can't, if you're in an area where you have the elected board members, right? You don't get to choose your board members in many ways, and so you are doing the best that you can with your system. I think it's always a good thing to have sort of what you're talking about in mind of just reimagining what it could look like. And I think if we don't continue to hold that, if we dismiss, oh, it will never happen, or that's a lofty goal that's good for that school over there. But if we never sort of say it could be possible, we never continue to hold possibility in our hands. Like, I think we do our students of the future a disservice. And I think you're right. Like, there's a lot of things that, there's not a market for some of these things yet. But I think that that's the part of really talking about potential. And potential can be scary because there's a lot of unknowns in that. But I think that that's where those best ideas of innovation can happen, is if you say, what would it look like if we did this? And that's where there's tons of potential, for lack of better, for creativity and innovation. And those students, I love that you talked about it. It was a student from Stanford coming up with this AI for better IEPs. We have to sort of lean into that for the students of the future, going, what are they going to create? Like, what are they going to innovate? And I think that it's important to hold for education leaders. So the last thing I'm going to end on, the last question, is just, what advice, do you have any short advice for education leaders who are navigating this world of AI in education? I mean, maybe that's a bigger question.
No, it's great. I try and make this pretty tangible. And this is based on lots of conversations with district leaders and seeing where district leaders are making progress, and I think feel effective rather than feel like they're wandering. So I see kind of three very actionable steps for district leaders that are thinking about, okay, I hear AI all the time. I know my students are using it. Some teachers love it. Some teachers hate it. But it's around, how do I address this head on? So 3 different steps at a district level. There's one category of kind of security and compliance. AI brings up many new questions around security and safety, whether that's FERPA and COPPA compliance, whether that's data security more specifically. Make that a priority. Ensure that your CTO and your leadership understand where you could be exposed. COSIN is a great resource out there that supports CTOs at the district level to make sure that from a compliance, privacy, safety, security realm, that districts are covered. So ensure that there's somebody focused on that. 2, I mentioned kind of the spectrum of teachers' excitement, fears, and concerns around AI. There's always some early adopters within districts on new tools. And so I'm seeing either at the district or at the state level, committees, like early adopter committee for AI tasks that can leverage some of this excitement, some of this creativity that teachers might feel about what could be possible for their classroom, for their students, for their school. So leverage that, bring that group together regularly, and district leaders can use that group to both, one, unlock their creativity and help teachers get jazzed about some potential, but also district leaders can use the creativity coming out of that group to kind of hold the future forward, as far as like, they don't have to be an expert at AI. They can use this creative group to be thinking what might be coming to help them see 6 months into the future, 12 months into the future. So that's 2. And the third category is schools aren't always flexing their innovation muscles because there's so much operational complexity to deliver on the commitments we have for our kids, for our families, for our communities. And so to kind of rebuild or to continue to flex that innovation muscle, I think it's helpful for districts to think about one discrete challenge or one discrete problem that they've been grappling with that you can set clear boundaries around, that might take a semester worth of time, 2 to 4 months to tackle, and see what AI could do towards that challenge. And I think this should not be aspirational. This should be very tactical solely in the efficiency realm. But use that to start to, for leadership at the district to start to use the tools themselves so they can gain some perspective, gain some opinion, and also actually prove up some value or not to understand, okay, how can we start thinking about this as a district? So I'd say those are 3 very actionable steps that districts could take next week. Start getting their feet wet in how does AI fit into our strategy.
That's great practical advice. I think even just taking a very tactical problem and seeing how can AI help us address this is such a great first step. And, Chris, this is a fantastic conversation, and I have just really enjoyed hearing your perspective and hearing about research and all the work that you guys are doing at at Stanford. There's lots of links that you shared or lots of resources that you shared, and we'll include those in the show notes. But thank you so much for being here. And hopefully this will be really helpful for our audience as they think about AI and the future of technology.
Well, Larissa, I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks to Branching Minds. And I would encourage people, last little plug, there's so much noise out in the world on AI in media broadly, education specifically, and it can feel so overwhelming. I would encourage, maybe this is the 4th add-on of education leaders should constantly be asking themselves to ground them. What does the research say on XYZ? Like, I'm hearing about this new tool. What does the research say? I'm hearing about AI to do this. Ask themselves, what does the research say? So build that habit of just asking that. And at the Generative AI for Education Hub, we have something called the Research Repository that we update once a month. It has all the academic research that exists that is relevant to AI and K-12. They can search, they can filter based on their interests, needs, and you can use that to help answer that question. When you feel overwhelmed, when you feel like there's so much hype and buzz, ground yourself, go back to, okay, what does the research say?
Yeah, that's great advice. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. Go ahead and subscribe to our feed wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, if you are enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and lets us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn at Branching Minds.